Hey everybody, welcome. We are live for another masterclass session. Now, today we're going to be showing power users how to create battle maps with the fantasy regional style. Now, if you're not entirely certain what is kind of possible to make battle maps with this kind of style, you can see that I have a couple examples here on the screen. I've made a dozen here that you can kind of go over and kind of take in what is possible. Now, every single one of these are available on my profile. You can clone and edit them for personal use. And if this stream becomes popular, if people kind of like this theme, this idea, then we'll probably turn this into a series and we can kind of make a lot of different battle maps with it. So we'll kind of go see how that kind of goes. Just let us know. As you can see, there is a variety of kind of maps that you can kind of make with the style, with just a little bit of creativity. Now, you might be asking yourself, now, why exactly would I want to make a battle map with the fantasy regional style? Which is a very good question that anyone, DM or GM, might want to ask themselves, right? Hey, Desiree, by the way, welcome. I'm glad that you're here. You might ask yourself, is why do I need to use these? Hey, first-time chatter, Tally Sin, glad that you are here. Now, why exactly would I want to make a battle map like this? And it's really quite simple, really. It's to break up the monotony of combat or the monotony of the campaign, by creating a battle map that is different from your typical, very functional, top-down orthographic battle map. Is that sometimes combat can get boring after a while. It can get repetitive, especially if there's a lot of combat in the campaign. It is usually there should be a balance of things. So what I'll end up doing is I'll make a battle map that is made with this style, and it will kind of break up the monotony of combat. It looks more interesting, and players end up enjoying seeing and doing something different than what they have been doing. So it's a great way to kind of break up your campaign. Now that I've kind of sold you the kind of argument to make them, we need to talk about the steps that it takes to kind of make these kind of maps. And the first step is to create a theme, right? That theme is important because the theme is going to determine the composition. It's going to determine the stamps you're going to use, the color palette that you're going to use. All of those things are important. So first you establish the theme. In this particular episode of this series or possible series, we're just going to make something not too dissimilar from this, a forest road. Not complex, pretty easy stuff. So the theme, forest road. I'm just going to go ahead and create a new map. I'm going to choose fantasy regional style. I'm going to choose the style, and then I'm going to go ultra 4K, and I'm going to choose a portrait. Now when it comes to choosing your canvas orientation or the aspect ratio, what I end up doing is I generally prefer a aspect ratio that has more vertical orientation because of the stamps, right? When you have top-down orthographic, the dimensions aren't like super long or super wide. The stamps can kind of vary in size and stuff, but it's easier to kind of place them on the canvas. With a fantasy regional battle map, I've kind of discovered that vertical orientation makes it easier for you to see whole trees, to see the larger stamps, and that way it kind of works better that way. And it also gives the players a sense of traveling either up or down in those directions, kind of giving them a path to kind of follow. So I find that, me personally, this vertical orientation is the best one to use, but you can do whichever one you want, landscape, square. I'm going to go with portrait, just to give it more verticalness. Once you've kind of like set up the orientation that you want, then you want to kind of like prep the canvas. And so what I'll do is I'll kind of just zoom out a little bit. I can get a look for the feel of it. And I want to come up with a concept, like a sketch of some kind. Now, since it's a forest road, the most iconic thing on a forest road is going to be the road itself. So I'll use a line to create the road part, or at least a guide to it. And so what I'll end up doing is creating this kind of meandering kind of feel to it. Oops, I noticed I got a blur on. Why don't we change these blend modes here. There we go, full size. And I'll use a path to kind of create the windiness of the road. Okay, so and I'm going to call this road the positive space. That means wherever there's going to be the road part. The negative space will be everything besides the road. And I'm going to go ahead and use another thing here to kind of show you what I mean. So these areas right here are going to be the negative space. Right here, all of this is negative space. And that's where you're going to put little places along the road, like maybe a well, a little camp area. It might be a group of trees, it might be a summoning circle, a ruin, whatever it might be. And that kind of gives your players something to interact with and do on the map. So like right here, we could have a ruin. Right here could be a little campsite. And then maybe in this negative space, we could put something else. Or it could just be cliffs, like a switchbacks to a cliff. And then we'll put something on the corner of each switchback that's kind of something for your players to interact with. So what I'll do is I'll stick with the basic road. I'm not going to do anything with that, but just kind of leave that there. This is going to give me an idea of like where to place stuff. So I'm just going to go ahead and place that there. And then I'm going to fill the canvas with the add mode of the mask tool. Just so you know, we're going to be changing up the tool with this new 2.0 version. So we won't even really have a mask tool anymore. Most of the mask stuff will be in this right layer panel right here. We're creating a whole new robust layer system that's going to allow you to create layer masks. It's going to allow you to delete areas of the map without accidentally removing stamps or textures. So we have a whole much more customizable layer system coming up real soon, which I'm really excited about. And then in some future videos, we'll be kind of breaking down those new features. So super excited about that. Okay, now let's go ahead and fill it in. Remember I said with the add mode, just go fill all. That way it's all filled in. I'm going to choose a brown texture to be like the dirt color, like you would expect. So let's go with this FG layer. I'm going to go to fill. So I have this texture. I think the texture, the size might be off a little bit. We go to advanced settings here, go to texture scale, and I'll bring it up a little bit. Fill. There we go. So now I have this nice dirt texture here. Now I want to maybe choose something that I want to represent either switchbacks or little cliffs, or whatever it might be, to kind of act as these kind of platforms or where the switchbacks will be. So I'm kind of thinking that what we could do is we can switch over to fantasy battle maps and use some stuff. I'm kind of noticing that with when you're making a battle map with the fantasy regional style, you will sometimes cross styles to use stamps, and that's perfectly okay. The trick is that you have to make sure that those all kind of match in properly. And there's this great stamp called cliff right here, and this works great for a cliff, right? You has a solid line at the bottom and then it has a soft edge at the top. That means that you can stack these on top of each other to create this sense of verticality. And so I'll kind of start here at the bottom right here, and I want to create these kind of switchbacks. I think I'll turn off the layer shadow. I don't really need those to be on, and I'll probably end up changing the blend mode for these as well. So we'll turn off that layer shadow. I don't need that on. I'm going to switch through here and kind of figure out the right pieces that will kind of go in over here. So this one right here, this is kind of a nice little curve to it. I'm going to rotate this and kind of move it in a way where I can get as much as I want out of it. So right about there looks good. Let's go ahead and stack a couple more. Let's stack this one right here. You see how well these kind of stack on top of each other, kind of creating this verticality to it. Kind of a helpful little trick there that you can kind of do. Let's go ahead and put this one here. Just like this, that'll look good. And we'll put another one down to act as like the switchback part. I think right about there. We'll have to stack a couple more to work them out. I wish we had these more vertical type of stamps, cliffs that we could use. I think that would be kind of helpful. Might look into maybe requesting those. So we'll continue adding here. I think that looks good. Let's go ahead and place another one down. I think maybe right on top like this, just to kind of give it a little bit more verticality. And let's add another one right over here. I don't want that one to pop. Let's go with this one. And then another one. Let's switch this one around. We're going to flip it. What about there? Looks good. We'll just keep adding stuff to it as we go. One more right about there. Okay. Let's see. Let me undo that. There we go. So we'll switch backs here. And let's give it a little bit more curvature to it. Let's remove this. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and lock that path. Get it out of the way. Okay. Now that I've kind of put those kind of cliffs together, I can change that blend mode to luminosity. Now it kind of matches in with the texture underneath of it. And if I want to paint, like have some grassy sections, I can, and it will also, grass will grow on that cliff ledge there. Next, I want to kind of pick a texture that I want to be the road itself. And you know what? I think since I'm already in fantasy battle maps, let's go ahead and just use that. There's this nice rough stone path right here. This works really well. But I'm also knowing that a mix of these kind of stone path, like, let me take a look here. There should be this nice stone texture in here, and you can kind of use varying sizes of it. This cobble floor stone right here, we're going to go ahead and do some editing to it real quick. We'll change the rotation and stuff to where it's facing the right way, and we're going to change the texture scale. And what I kind of noticed about these textures is that all the stones are on the same size. And so what I'll do is I'll take varying sizes and save them. So let's say I want a series of big stones like this one. I'll make it nice and big and then go to favorite. And then I'll bring the scale back down to a smaller size. And then I'll end up favoriting that one. And then when I go to switch over to favorites, I'll have these two textures here. And then what I'll end up doing is I'll bring the opacity down and I'll create an initial stripe or where the road is, like this. Just have it go through here like this. And we can change the orientation of the stones as well. So I'll just go in, single click, and just kind of add in that first swath for the road. Those are my small stones. Then I'll go in, single click, to start creating in some bigger sections like this, so I can get some of this varying sizes in the road. Don't worry about it being a little weird at first, because you're going to end up doing a lot of blending in the end. Now that that road has been established, I can delete that line, of course, and then I can kind of move on to that next step. I'm just going to keep kind of maneuvering some of these around to kind of fit into this space better. There we go. Right about here looks good. Okay. And then I can go in and add in a little bit of grass. Let's go back to Fantasy Regional. And then we'll type in grass and we'll kind of get that started. Oops. I don't know what grawstone is. There we go. And then we can kind of pick a grass texture that we want. I think I kind of like this one. Let's go with this one right here. It has some brown in it, some other brown in it. I think that's some good color there. And then we'll go in and just kind of paint a little bit of grass on the side here and there. And it's okay to kind of have some of it go onto the cliff as well, because grass can grow on the side of a cliff, right? So just kind of put the grass in those negative areas. We're starting with texturing. And by doing some texturing, then we can kind of decide where the stamps will go. Okay, we've got some green in there. Texturing is always going to give you a lot of changes. So we'll quickly save it. I'm just going to call it Forest Road. Then we'll go ahead and move on to that next step, which is start applying some more texturing to blend those cliffs in. And then we'll start adding in some stamps to go around the edges to frame the road, because the road is where most of the action is going to be taking place. So what we're going to be focusing on here is an important concept of functionality and art, like having a balance between these two options. Like, how is it that I make this beautiful art, but how do I also make it functional? How is it that players can still maneuver around the map and there's not much confusion, because the style is different, right? It's different than your orthographic top-down. So stamp placement is going to be really important. It's important not to place stamps that are going to block the view of the player and their ability to move around the map. So all the big stamps are going to be placed in a way to where they are out of the way from the center pieces, the walkable areas of the map. And they're also going to be placed near the cliff areas so that way they're not blocking anything. They're up against the cliff. So when you're putting together this kind of map, object placement, where things go, is going to be super important, so that you don't accidentally create a beautiful piece of art, but it's just not functional for your players to use. So we'll be covering important issues like that. Let's go ahead and place a little bit more stamps here. I want to place another one like right here. I didn't change the blend mode, so let's copy and paste. Place it right here. There we go. So a good texture to use when you're any kind of cliff, whether you're making a battle map with Fantasy Regional or Fantasy Battlemaps, there's a great alpha texture called Cracked Ground. This is really, really helpful. You notice that there isn't much transition between the grass up here and then the ground, right, and the stamps. And so this texture right here is really great to use. So I'll go ahead and place it right along the edge here, and you'll see that it starts to create some kind of transition between the stamp and the ground underneath it. So I'll kind of place this texture underneath these cliffs so that it kind of transitions the stamp in with the texture beneath it. Cracked ground is a must. Absolutely use it. There we go. So we got some nice cracked ground in there. That works out really well. I think it's okay. We'll just go ahead and save it one more time, and then we'll kind of move on to those next steps. So we've created this switchback. Now, on each one of these switchbacks, we're going to be putting like some kind of point of interest. Like it could be a campfire, it could be a ruin, it could be a summoning circle area, it could be a fallen tree, a campground, whatever it might be. There's a lot of different stuff. So what I'll end up doing is I'll choose maybe one stamp to represent the centerpiece on each place. So down here at the bottom, what we could do is create a little campsite somewhere. So like maybe right over here in this corner, I can take this stone texture right here, just kind of place it up against here. Remember I mentioned great places to place stamps is up against these cliffs right here, because that way it won't block the path where that stone is. So if I go into Fantasy Regional, and let's say that I want to create like a camp area, I can just go camp. And so now here's the part where you start setting kind of the scale a little bit. And so what I've kind of done is the stones have already kind of set some kind of scale for me with the varying sizes of stones. But that first stamp that's recognizable, such as like a camp or whatever, is kind of really going to determine a lot of the scale for me. So now that I've set that first stamp, I'm going to take other stamps and scale them to this stamp to use as kind of a guide. It's that rule. The first stamp kind of represents your scale, right? And so I want to create a little campsite in this corner right here. And then I want to maybe create like a little scene there. So I could put like a tent. This could go in the corner. I could take this and rotate it like this and put this in the corner, and then maybe put the campfire over here. This can be a little bit bigger. And you see how it overlaps the campsite over this thing right here, and see how it doesn't block anything up here. So this area right here isn't being blocked by this stamp because the cliff is behind it. So this is the trick of placing stamps, to make sure that none of them kind of overlap too much. Or they do overlap a little bit, but not so much to take up the space where they're going to be walking. So we're going to follow that principle pretty much the whole time. So I have a little camp scene right here. I have that. It doesn't hurt to add some details, but we can do that later. So that's that first piece. You kind of go to this little campsite, and then as you continue going up the path, you'll kind of bump into the next thing. So what we might want to do is maybe add in like, maybe there's a well of some kind. So we can put like maybe an old abandoned well. It's like right on this corner right here. Notice how it's up against that cliff. And make sure that we get the scale right. Up against here, scale is right. We're going to put it right on here, just like that. And so now we have a well in that area. We could also move it to over here, right in this corner. I think this also works well. It's a little parallel to this scene right here. I kind of like it better up here, but you could put it down here if you want. There's a little more space down here. Maybe like a ruin would look good there. But let's go put the well right here. And then I'll go ahead into the catalog and type in ruin. And there's a really popular ruin that I like to use. It's in the desert ruin, and it's this one right here. You kind of get some structures right here. And you can kind of use these structures right here to kind of create like a little scene. So let's maybe rotate this one and put one right here so it kind of matches. Let's also change the saturation to make it kind of this grayish color. I'll change the brightness, and then I'll also bring the contrast up. There we go, just to kind of get a little bit more distinguished pieces there. And I can kind of place it right here on this side over here. And that kind of represents kind of like a ruined structure, like maybe an old hut, or maybe a ruined part of a building or a wall that kind of fell over. It's something that your players can interact with. They can walk on top of it. They can push someone, trip them, whatever it might be. So having that kind of piece in the corner there kind of adds to that, as well as the well up here at the corner. And then it doesn't hurt to put something at the top as well. So let's go ahead and start. Now that we have these centerpieces, now we can start adding in something to frame the canvas. And what I normally use for that is trees. It is called a forest ruin, so it wouldn't make any sense to have a forest without having the trees. So what I'll end up doing here is you'll notice that the shadows are are baked in. So I'll kind of flip it so the shadows are facing off screen, and then I'll come back and fix those with clipping masks later. And I do want to get the scale right, so I'll bring the stamp up. Let's bring it up a layer. And then you place these in areas that are not going to impede where your players are going to be walking, remember? So I can put one up against right here. I can place one right here. And maybe even one right here. It blocks a little bit of the path, but it gets the general idea, right? That there are trees there. So kind of a nice little trick. Just throw in these trees. I'm going to put it right here so it doesn't block too much of that walkable space up here. Same thing, I'll put another one right here. Maybe make it a little bit smaller, as a smaller variation of the tree. Or I can put a different type of tree on there. For instance, I can use these ones instead, like this. Just bring the scale up and make sure it doesn't block too much of the walk space up above. So you guys are starting to get the general idea. The point is just not to allow stamps to get in the way of your player movement. That's the functionality part. The art part is just making it look aesthetically pleasing to the player, but again, making sure that it's fully functional. One thing that I'll also do is I'll rotate the trees to face kind of different directions, like this, just to kind of give it a more realistic feel. You know, there's a popular trope that's written in books like windswept pines, this kind of saying. And to kind of show that windswept kind of feel, we can rotate them facing in different directions so that the wind looks like they have swept them and carried them off in various directions. So we'll kind of add more stuff, like I think a tree right here is look good. It doesn't block too much of the forest road here. You can put another one over in the corner right here, just like we did over here, so it doesn't block the movement. Your players are moving around here. See, this space is available. It's open. I can move this over to here, so there's even more space available. So we're adding in these stamps to kind of create a sense of a frame, right? Let's go ahead and add in a couple more trees, I think. Let's add in this one right here, and then we'll add in some big ones. And then maybe let's add in a unique tree at the top, something maybe different from the other trees, like maybe it's a willow or it's a big oak tree, something like that. I'm not sure. Just to kind of give it like there's something is changing as you're going about, right? A lot of forests, it isn't just one type of tree. There's a lot of different trees. There's a diversity to it. So we'll maybe try using a different tree. Let's go put one right there. It's kind of a different one. And then we'll add another one over here. Let's go with this one. I don't want it to block too much. And this will kind of make it distinguished to be a little bit different than the trees at the bottom, right? As you're going up. And you could have your players go down the road too, but I'm going up. So I'm starting from the bottom and kind of moving my way up to it. Okay, now you will notice that there are some trees that have these shadows right here. And those shadows, maybe you don't want to have those. You can remove those pretty easily with just a clipping mask. So what I'll end up doing is I'll go over to Shape Tool. I'll choose a brush. And then I'll turn off Stroke and then choose Fill Clipping Mask. Now, when the new editor system, the new layer system comes out, you'll be able to just place this tree on a layer, and then you'll be able to right click and then add a mask layer right over it. But for right now, this is how you would do this until that new layer system is implemented. And so what I'll end up doing is I'll switch to blur and I'll make it as blurry as possible. Now, because you're not adding a texture to the fill, you're only adding a clipping mask, it will blur the clipping mask edges. So when I place this down, and then I go up a layer like this, you'll notice that it does remove it, right? And so this is kind of a helpful way of removing shadows that you don't need. Again, once we kind of add the new layer system, you won't even have to bother with that. So for the meantime, it's just here's the way to kind of do it until we get that new system implemented. But I just want to remove the shadows because I kind of feel that they're in the way. And I can just paint the shadows myself. I kind of feel like that's going to work out better. So I'll go ahead and just add it in here, put it all around here. There we go, removing those shadows. I think, oops, some right here as well. Let's remove these shadows. There we go. Okay, so I've kind of removed those shadows. Let's go ahead and add in some more details. Right now, there isn't much details to it and things look a little different, I think I might select all the cliffs and I might bring the brightness down just so that to show that there's a little bit more depth in the cliff. And it kind of contrasts against the darker brown or the darker green of the trees. So that kind of gives it a little bit more contrast, and it contrasts against the road, which is a lighter color. And now the cliffs are a darker color, and that's going to create some contrast. So that's helpful. Why don't we go ahead and add in some grass and some bushes and some other things to break up the transition at the bottom of these stamps. You notice here that the line work is thick, kind of clumsy, because we used a different style. And so what I'll do is I'll just end up using these grass stamps right here to kind of put them in clusters and kind of hide some of the line work. Kind of a helpful little trick. So I go through here, you can see I can add that line work. The grass is a little bright green, so I might end up changing it to like maybe a desaturated green, so it kind of matches more. Oopsie, there's a clip mask on there. I'll have to turn that up a layer. There we go. I'm gonna place that, and I do want to place some green underneath the stamps as well. We'll place some up here as well. Right now I'm all using the same kind of size, but once you've added in those larger sizes, then I'll come in with a medium size stamp. Don't forget the usual like rule of 3, add in a cluster of them. One over here, add some small ones over here, here. And then I'll go even smaller, down 2 more sizes. And now you have this really tiny variant right here, which is what you would kind of expect from nature, right? There's always a diversity of plant life. It's never all the plants are the exact same size. Everything is very varied, and it looks a little bit more realistic when you kind of add it this way. So let's go ahead and add some bigger ones here, here. And then what I'll end up doing is I'm going to select all the grass, select from this set, and I'll just desaturate just a little bit. That rule of 3 for me, it's just what I call the rule of 3. It's actually based off a book, but the rule of 3 for me is just when I put clusters of things together, like clusters of stamps, rocks, debris, whatever, I'll usually cluster them in 3s, whether it's all the same size. Like here, you'll see there's 3 pieces of grass, all the same size, or a cluster of 1 large, medium, and small. So the rule of 3 is just a cluster of stamps. You can actually have them be 4, 5, 6, whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. So I've selected all these and I've kind of desaturated them a little bit. And then what I'll also do is just quickly kind of place a little bit of grass texture underneath them as well, just so that they kind of blend in better. If it's just kind of dirt, it doesn't really make any sense. So just right underneath where the grass is, the grass stamps are going to naturally be maybe a little bit of the grass texture underneath it, right? Just kind of the logic behind it. And I'll also put some grass inside of here and here as well. There we go. Put along this edge. And what I'll also do is I'll kind of break up. So parts of the road are completely covered with grass and dirt. So I'll kind of like put some here. So now it's kind of broken up. Let's put another one like right here. Oh, just to kind of like frame the well, I'll just add a little bit of grass here and kind of break that up. There we go. Now the path kind of has a little bit more of a broken up kind of feel to it. There we go. Yeah, I kind of like this more broken up kind of feel of the road with the path and everything. Let's go ahead and save it. A lot of changes here. But you're kind of getting the general idea, right? The functionality part is just making sure that you really don't block your player's visibility so that when they're walking around, there's not a giant tree in the way. So the other things that I like to add is to throw in stumps. A stump is always a good choice. And I'll just scale them up to the size of whatever the tree stump sizes are. And then I can kind of place them here and there, gathered around, place them around. And now you adds another little nice brown color to it because you had a lot of greens and some gray. But adding in these kind of stumps here kind of adds in a little bit more to it. So I'll put one here. And then I'll bring the scale down for some smaller trees. See, there's that rule of 3. Add in a smaller one here. Add one here. Let's add one along there. And then we'll add a couple more up here. And then maybe even smaller ones. Tiny little ones just over here. Just to kind of add a little bit more to it. There we go. Some tinier ones. I think that looks good. Let's add one over here. And let's add one over here. Okay. And then you can also throw in some grass stamps where some of the road has opened up. So like right here, you'll see that there is some of the road that's kind of been opened up. And so go ahead and just place a couple grass stamps in those areas where the road has kind of been broken up. And that will kind of add a little bit more realism to it, right? You've been down a road that's kind of old and hasn't been used a lot. And you'll see like patches of grass kind of growing in between the stones and pieces of moss and stuff like that. And so just adding in those little pieces of grass. So kind of get the concept, right? Wherever there is grass texture, add a grass stamp. Wherever there's a grass stamp, add a grass texture. It just helps with the continuity between the stamp and the texture underneath of it. Nice little kind of trick that you can kind of pull off there. I like the darker brown too of the cliffs. I think that looks a little better. I might throw in just a little bit more of the cracked ground in some of the areas like over here, just to add that up. And it doesn't hurt to even add in some cracked ground on the road itself, just to kind of give it this kind of broken up feel to it. Maybe just put a little bit here, a little bit over here. And because this is a ruin right here, it kind of makes sense to add a lot of cracked ground around the ruin, right where it collapsed. So I just kind of add this kind of collapsed part. And then I might want to go in and show where there's been rubble, right? You see there's this ruin here, but where did all the debris, where did the other parts of this building go, right? And so a great trick is to use rubble from Fantasy Battlemaps. You just type in rubble from Fantasy Battlemaps. Oopsie. And there's this nice rubble piles. And what I'll do is just to make sure to match these, I'll just bring the saturation. I'll bring kind of the brightness up and the contrast. And then you can kind of place these. Let's bring the contrast up a little bit more. There we go. And you can kind of place these in an area where you kind of want some rubble to kind of be, to make it look like it kind of fell over. So you got some rubble right there. Maybe I want to add another one like right here. Let's go ahead and bring the opacity or bring that size down. I can kind of place it right here. Let's bring the brightness down a little bit. There we go. And you can kind of see that you can kind of create this illusion of rubble and debris by kind of adding these rubble stamps. And now it kind of makes more sense, right? Because when something collapses and falls, that debris, that rubble has to go somewhere, right? Unless people on the road grabbed that stone for their own mason work. So it's always good to show like the aftermath of something like that happening. So a little bit of rubble, debris, kind of is a great way to kind of add that in there. Let's go ahead and save it. It's so many changes. I'm going to check my time. 33 minutes, lots of time. Let's go ahead and throw in some more details like lighting. We can throw in some more points of interest and some things that players can interact with. Some great things to throw down on the canvas are like adding in a log that's blocked the road so that players can interact with it. Maybe throwing down an old ruined cart and putting it up against a path somewhere to kind of tell a story. All of those things are really, really helpful. So we'll start first with adding in some details in our first scene down here. Let's go ahead and add in a log. And I want to create maybe some seats so people can kind of sit around the fire. So I'll create some logs, kind of place them down like this. And in this way, now players can kind of sit down, and maybe there's like some bandits that are sitting at this camp right here around this fire, and that'd be some people you're going to bump into. Or maybe this is where you start, right? So all those things are nice. Let's go to light sources. We'll type in light. I've showed this trick a lot, but one of the great tricks is to stack lighting to create more dynamic lighting. So what I'll do is layer 4, I'll put on a yellow or that orangish light, put that right where the actual flame is, and then I'll take a larger yellow light up to +5, and I'll bring the opacity down. I'd say about 50, and then kind of put it right on the top like this. And now I have a nice stack of light sources. And then I can end up, now that I have a light source, I can start painting in shadows, reflecting, kind of not reflecting, but casting the shadows away from that fire. I won't add those details yet. We'll just move over to the next scene and then add some stuff in there. So we'll go back to Fantasy Regional. And there are these really nice stamps right here. These are kind of like these, I don't know, some kind of partition of some kind. Not sure what exactly they are, but these can work great to act as like other portions of this wall right here. So I can go ahead and just add pieces like this, flip, rotate, and kind of make them look like there are other pieces to the wall that were added. So I can go ahead and place one maybe like right here along this edge, like this, and place another one kind of like this. I'll kind of rotate a little bit so it looks like it broke. And then maybe another one right here to kind of look like it's kind of leading into a path into here. And then it wouldn't hurt to like maybe put another one kind of leaning like this up against here. Let's place it on top, just like that. There we go. So now we kind of have a nice ruined area right here. These are a little bright. I think I'll bring the brightness down on them a little bit because they're popping out a little too much. I think that looks good. So now you have that nice ruined area over there. I think that looks fine. There's also a nice texture in Fantasy Battle Maps called Rubble that works great right here. It's called Stone Rubble. You're going to have to change with the scale a little bit. So we'll go ahead and change the texture scale. You can also just paint in the rubble as well all along here. Let's bring the opacity back up to 100%. We'll just soft brush in some rubble here, all along here. There we go. All along there, there's some rubble, and even some right here. There you go. So now you have a nice ruined scene over here, and then you can kind of go up to the well. Let's go ahead and put a roadblock, some kind of roadblock blocking the way. So let's go with type in tree, and there should be these fallen trees. There's this one right here. This is a good one. And I believe this one right here also works. These are fantasy battle maps, but they work just fine. So we can kind of remove this one and kind of place this one on top. And then we'll bring that brightness down to kind of match in with the darker against that lighter gray color. And so now you have a roadblock kind of blocking the road. And so this is something that your players can kind of interact with. And then we can go up to the top here. We have this well right here. Let's go ahead and place it maybe right up against here. Should look good. Some details that you can add are like spilled water. So I can type in blood. Now, funny enough, I don't really use these for blood because these are a little too blotchy. I prefer from different styles, but these work just fine for showing water. So you can kind of place one down and then look for that kind of color that you're looking for to represent water. And then you can kind of scale it a little bit, and then you can change that blend mode to whichever blend mode you think is going to look best. So right here, this one kind of looks okay. I don't mind that. I might bring the opacity down a little bit, but this can kind of look like there's some water on the ground here. Another thing you could do is you could throw in a bucket. There's a bucket right here. Let's just place this bucket. Let's get the scale right by placing it up against this bucket. Let's place it down, and then I'll place it above the water. Bring the scale, the opacity up, and just so that it kind of matches, we'll bring that brightness down. And then you have like spilt water from this bucket coming down right here like that. A nice little detail that you can kind of add in there. And then we can add in some more stuff. Like maybe we want to have maybe oh, you know what? Let's actually change the piece of wood, the stump over to here, and then we'll use a pillar as the roadblock right there. So right here is this roadblock that players will encounter, and then I'll go ahead and use a pillar from the Fantasy Battle Map style. This pillar right here, I think should work just fine. And this will make this as if it was a part of this building right here. And I'll place that just right here like this. And then you have that next roadblock that your players are going to encounter. So when they start down here at the bottom, they're going to encounter the campsite first. They're going to come across the ruin right here. Maybe there's a story for that. Then they're going to come up this corner here and then encounter this well, the roadblock, come up here and up to here. So all the various elements are kind of there to kind of represent that. Now, let's go ahead and save it, and then we're going to add some we're going to add in some final details, and I'll show you how to show like height. Like how is it that I show that this part of the switchback up here at the top is higher up than this switchback down here at the bottom. And I'll show you how we're going to go end up doing that. But first we'll quickly save here. And we're going to actually use light sources to kind of do a lot of the lighting for us. So I'll show you how to go about doing that. First, let's go ahead and add in some filters, because what I want to do is create a continuity of the art. We're using art from different styles. And so to make these kind of match more, I can go to a filter and then pick a filter that I want that's going to work best. And I usually use a color filter for that. So I could like add saturation, faded if I wanted to give it more illustrative look to it, bring the sharpness up, sepia to give it a more yellow look. There's grayscale. Winter if I want to give it a more bluer look, red sky to kind of bring out the more reddish kind of color, which I sometimes like using red sky. It kind of adds a little bit more to the red, makes it pop a little bit more. I kind of like that. And then I will add like a clarity filter. I'll bring the opacity down a little bit on this, but just to give that nice color, it kind of pops out a little bit. So those filters kind of help. It doesn't hurt to also throw in like a vignette filter. What I'll end up doing with the vignette is I'll change the blend mode to overlay. And then I'll kind of bring up this. And then what this kind of does is it kind of, because the corners are already covered in stamps, it kind of creates this vignette around the edge here. And then it leaves open, it creates this contrast in the center parts here. And so what I'll end up doing is I'll add some light sources to show that certain areas are higher up than others, or you can use the top layer. So there are a couple ways that I can go about doing this. So what I'll end up doing is I'll go to top layer and I'll change that blend mode to overlay. And then I'll bring the opacity down, or you can just use color, top, bring the opacity down quite a bit. I usually bring it to about 30. And then what I'll do is I'll cover up each space. So that first tier, I didn't even add a shadow. This next tier, I'll add more shadow. And then this next tier, I'll add more shadow. So now we have some height kind of going up. So it's darker at the bottom and it gets lighter as you go to the top. Now it is a little, looks a little weird right now with that contrast. And so what we'll do now is we'll turn around and go to the erase function. Okay. And I'll bring the opacity down a little bit more. Now I'm going to erase the areas in which the light source is most prevalent. So I'll go in right here and just start erasing this area. And I'll even erase some of the road too. It's okay if the black is on some of the cliff side, but to remove some of it on the road so that the road begins to pop out more. So I'm starting to erase where the light source is and where some of that road is. So it kind of pops out. There we go. Now the road pops out a little bit more. That looks good. I might even take this overlay, go to this option right here and just bring the opacity down a little bit. So I can bring the opacity down as much as I want so I can affect it. So I can bring it down if I feel it's a little too dark. I think right about there looks okay. Let's go ahead and add a light source at the top up here as well, just to show that this part is a little bit darker or a little bit higher up than the others. So I'll throw a light source down. I'll bring it all the way up. Let's go ahead and rotate it. I'm going to end up changing the opacity for it. Oops, for some reason that's not working. Let's fix that. There we go. Bring it up to the top, bring the overlay down. There we go. Bring the opacity down so it's a little bit more light up here at the top. There we go. I think that looks okay. A little bit more light at the top there, a little bit of light here. Looks good. Now I can go down and kind of take a better look at it. I'm walking, checking everything to make sure that there's continuity, that there's a way that players can move around. Let's go ahead and maybe move this one in a little bit more. I don't want to take up too much of that space. Over here, let's take a look here. Let's go ahead and continue adding in now our little bit of light sources here. So got that light there, top. Just going to add the nice thick dark shadow here. Let me bring the opacity up. Oopsie. Oh, it's set to erase. There we go. My bad. Let's bring the opacity down, and then we'll add a little bit of dark kind of shadow here. There we go. Same thing here. Let's bring the opacity up. Seems to be going a little slower. There we go. That's a little better. Create a little bit of shadow work. There we go. And then I'll create a little bit of shadow work along here as well. To show this side. Let's put a little bit of shadow work around campfire. There we go. Just start adding a little bit of shadow work away from that light source. There we go. Okay. Let's go ahead and add in some last little bit of little details in there. Let's go ahead and add in some twigs and twigs and branches. I think that's a good idea to add in there. We'll change the texture scale. Let's bring the brightness down. That way it matches that same brown color. And then I'll go in here and just kind of wherever there's like a fallen tree, it kind of makes sense to add those twigs. Right underneath a tree is where you would add twigs and sticks. Kind of makes sense, right? Right underneath this tree, some twigs and sticks. Right? Branches fall down from the wind. They break. So good places to put those twigs and stuff is all underneath those trees. Like underneath this tree right here is a great one. All underneath here. And then underneath this one as well. And definitely underneath where this tree fell apart. Right here. There we go. So you got some twigs here. So now you have all kinds of things for your players to interact with. They start at the bottom here. They might interact with maybe some people at this campsite. They might go to this small ruin over here. Maybe the people who were at this campsite were over here looking for treasure, or they're bandits of some kind. You come up to the well. Maybe there's someone trapped inside of the well, and your players are tasked to kind of pull them out of the well to help them, and they'll help you along your quest. So throwing in these little points of interest on each switchback, or multiple locations on each switchback, kind of allows your players to kind of interact and to kind of do things. Now, the last thing that I will say, I think this is almost done. I might add in just a couple more details, but I do want to talk a little bit about how is it that you kind of run a map like this. It depends on the system that you're using. Like, how is it that I would run combat on this? And you'll see that it's not your typical orthographic top-down kind of battle map. And so you'll have like these cliff faces and stuff. And so what I'll do is I'll just do like a simple athletics or ability check for climbing. So whenever players move their token on top of one of these cliffs right here, I just immediately say, hey, special rules, there's ability checks for climbing. And it might change the movement speed as well. So it's just a way of like changing it up. So it's more clear, like, hey, you're actually on a cliff, you're actually climbing up, you can see it. And so I'll add those additional kind of rules to it. That's kind of helpful. And I'll also add in other things like ladders and stuff to the cliffs. So there are different ways that your players can like access. So if they want to get up to the top of this cliff right here without having to go all the way around the bend there, they totally can. I'll just change the brightness of this thing like this, and then I'll switch it like this. And then now there's another access point to go up here. Players like options, and it won't create too much of a backtrack either. So if they come up here, they might come to the campsite, they might climb up this ladder up to this next level and just avoid all this together. Players do like options. Another thing you can do is like maybe throw on some vines. Like you're just like you can climb a tree. You can also, or climb that ladder. You can also put some vines just right alongside here, and your players can also climb up that if they want to avoid going around the switchback. It's kind of a way of adding in something that your players can kind of interact with. And that's something that I always like to do. So there's some very clear vines that are here. I'll select all of them. I'll turn that shadow off, and we'll kind of desaturate to fit the same kind of green. And if I do want a shadow, I can go to shadow, default, or custom object shadow, and just kind of put the shadows kind of going down underneath like this. And so now you have some way of traveling up this one as well. Kind of nice little tricks that I use when I'm adding a map like this, so players can maneuver, they have options, they can choose what they want to interact with, and there's plenty of stuff on the map to interact with. They can pick up one of these camping logs and throw it at an enemy. Maybe there's your player has a cooking pot. They can go in and grab some ash, burning hot ash from the fire, and fling it in an enemy's face. You can take an enemy and kick them over the log, and they can fall butt first into the fire. They can pick up one of these pieces of rock right here and throw it. All of those things. They can climb up the ladder and then do a lunging attack down on enemy down here. So there's a lot of things that your players can kind of interact with, and that's super important when you're trying to create some kind of interaction for your players with the battle map. So it's important to kind of add in these little things like stumps and rocks, logs, fire, pieces of rock, whatever it might be, because those are the things your players are going to run to when maybe they're trapped in a corner against one of these ledges and they don't have anything else to defend themselves with. Maybe there's a rock right there handy on the ground and they want to throw it right at that person's face. So throwing in all these little tiny little details and things to interact with, multiple ways of maneuvering throughout the map, are all super, super important. So I hope you guys got the general idea of how it kind of comes together. I generally add in one more filter, which is a color adjustment filter. And this color adjustment filter is great because then I can go in and kind of change things. Like if I want this map to be like a Fey map, I can change the hue to the colors that I want it to be. So if I want it to be some kind of Fey or an orc place, or maybe I want it to have it be like a creepy mountain pass, I can always change the hue if I want to. I can change the saturation to bump up the color to make it more saturated, or if I want it to be a little more gloomy, and I can start desaturating it so it kind of gives it that more gloomy, maybe Curse of Strahd or grimdark kind of feel to it. If you're feeling the map is too dark from the vignette, I can bring that brightness up to give it that, or if I want to bring the brightness down, I can kind of bring the brightness down. If I wanted to give it a night feel to it, and I can bump up that contrast to really make it kind of pop up more. Whenever I bump the contrast, it gets a little darker, and so I'll usually bump the brightness just a little bit as well. So there's a lot of cool tricks that you can kind of do with filters to kind of bring out the elements in your map. Contrast is super important because that contrast is really going to make the lightest lights pop against the darkest dark. So I generally use a color adjustment filter, and contrast is one of the first ones that I use. It's really, really helpful. I'm noticing here that I should add in some kind of cracked ground right here. There we go. Kind of looked weird right there, but you get the general idea, right? So you just kind of start here at the bottom and then move your way up through all these different things. Yeah, using that red is definitely helpful. And the reason why I like the red so much is because it brings a warm to the green cool, right? So you have a lot of greens in here already. And so you have all these cool colors. And so that red sky really brings the reds, the browns out, while also adding a little bit of tint of red to those greens, kind of diminishing some of the cool and allowing that warmer colors to kind of pop out. I generally apply at least one color filter to the majority of my map, so that one, it creates a continuity in the art, and that it also adds kind of like a color like atmosphere or theme, or whatever color filter that I'm going to use to help to bring the art to pop out. So I recommend that after you finish a map, you think you're done, go back and just play with filters and see what filters you can use to help to make the map pop out a lot more. It is totally doable with filters. You just got to go through and play with them. So maybe we can do an entire masterclass on filters if you feel that'd be helpful. Like maybe people can give me the link to their maps that they feel could use some more pop, and then we'll go ahead and just edit those live here on the stream using filters to make them pop out more. Now, if you guys found this particular stream helpful, if you found that you kind of like regional maps, that's great. Let me know, because I won't know to make more content like this unless you let us know. Okay, so let us know in the chat if you want to see a series of masterclass sessions where we make regional battle maps, whether it's a forest road or it's a ruin or whatever it might be. Let me know in the chat. If you're watching on YouTube, let me know in the comments, because I won't know what kind of content you guys want unless you mention it to us, okay? Because we really do want to make content that you all want to see. All right, and I'll make sure that this map is clonable. I'll make this clonable, put it on my profile, and then you can kind of clone and edit this for your own personal use, okay? Thanks, everybody. I'm looking forward to seeing you all on Friday of this week. I think we're doing part 9 or part 10 of our Creating an Epic World. We're slowly wrapping up that series. We're almost in the last couple episodes, so I'm excited about that. Don't forget to let me know if you want to see more videos like this with Fantasy Regional, okay? Ooh, I like that. Hey, first time chatter, roasted beans. Glad that you're here. Please stay safe and healthy, marry map making, and I will see you all on Friday, okay? I'll see you later. Bye.